Hi, today we're going to look at one of the more controversial leadership theories, situational leadership, or as the chapter calls it, as the book calls it, the situational approach to leadership. Now, here's a summary of what situational leadership says. It basically says that leaders should match their leadership style to the competence and the commitment of subordinates. So remember in the previous chapter, we were talking about leadership styles and how you could be high-end task, highly directive. You can also be highly relational or not highly relational, and you can combine those two axes in four combinations. Situational leadership basically says that the leader should choose one of those four styles of leadership based on the characteristics of the subordinates, and we're going to see it's the competence and the commitment. So what this theory does is it focuses on choosing a leadership style appropriate for the situation. That's why it's called situational leadership, because you look at the situation and you choose a leadership style that corresponds to that. Now, something interesting about this is that situational leadership is used extensively in organizational leadership training and in organizational development. And maybe some of you have gone through leadership training seminars. And a lot of times, situational leadership is presented as the theory of leadership. This is how leadership really functions. And if you're not doing it this way, you're not doing it right. That's what makes it so controversial, because we're going to see that that is very questionable. But it's something interesting is if you had taken this course in leadership back in the 1980s or the 1990s, situational leadership would have most likely been portrayed as the very best model of leadership that there was. You probably would have used, I took a leadership course in the around 1990 or so, and here's my textbook, Management of Organizational Behavior by Hersey and Blanchard. They're the ones that developed situational leadership. And it was a great textbook. It had tons and tons of information, and its final conclusion was that the best type of leadership was situational leadership. So there's a whole generation of organizational development practitioners who are convinced that situational leadership is the only way to go. Tons of research has been done since then, and so we're going to see that there's good things in situational leadership, but then there's also some things that we need to be careful about. Now let's review a little bit about the leadership styles. So remember, a leadership style was kind of like the behavioral pattern of an individual who attempts to influence others. So it's this kind of characteristic behavior that you're using when you're interacting with somebody, and that there were two dimensions to it. There was the task behaviors, or in this model, it's called directive behaviors, but it's basically the same thing: trying to help somebody with their work, setting goals, teaching them to do something, telling them what to do, focusing on the task so that it gets done. And then there's relationship behaviors, or as this model calls them, supportive behaviors, where you have more of a dialogue, a caring relationship where you listen to each other and you support one another, and it's a lot more on the human side, building up the relationship. And both of these dimensions can be either high or low. This theory says that you should choose whether you're going to be high or low in each of these dimensions according to the situation. Now, here's the diagram for situational leadership that's found in the book. It's kind of a complex diagram, but you'll see you can kind of follow it, and that's one of the reasons I think this is attractive, is because the diagram looks really complicated, but once you get the system down, it makes a lot of sense. So now what we have is let's start off by looking at the 4 leadership styles first. That's what these 4 boxes are. Here we've got the directive behavior, the task behavior, and we've got high over here and low over here, just like in Blake and Mooton's grid. And here we've got the supportive behavior, high up here and low here. And these 4 boxes represent the 4 leadership styles, except they have very different names here. And the names are what's on this little path here. So in Blake and Mooton, we had kind of this authoritarian compliance management or authoritarian. Here it's called directing. So this is just high in directive behavior, low in supportive behavior. We've got coaching, which is high in both directive and supportive behavior. That's what was team management before. Here we've got supporting. This was the country club management, where you're not very directive, but you're very supportive. And then the impoverished management is now called delegating, where you don't do much directive, directing or much supporting. You just delegate and let the person go. So we've got the 4 same combinations as below, as before in the Blake and Mooton's managerial grid, the leadership styles approach. But now we've got a path to follow. That's what this, it looks like a bell curve going through there. Is that we're supposed to follow this path according to the situation. So what's the situation that we're supposed to look at to choose the appropriate style? Well, the situation that we're supposed to look at is what Hersey and Blanchard call the developmental leaders levels of the followers. And so the definition is the degree to which subordinates have competence and commitment necessary to accomplish a given task or activity. And that's what's known as the subordinate's developmental level. So whatever the developmental level of the subordinate is, you're supposed to choose the appropriate leadership style. Now this developmental level, as we're going to see, is pretty controversial. But this dimension, the development level, has 4 levels in this model, D1 through D4. D1 is the lowest developmental level, so it's low over here, and the highest developmental level is D4. So the lowest developmental level is where somebody doesn't know how to do the job. They might be new, and they're all excited about it. They're really committed to doing it, but they don't know how to do it. The next developmental level is they have some competence, but their commitment goes down. They don't have that initial enthusiasm. The third developmental level is they're starting to get pretty good at it, but they've still got low commitment. And then finally, the fourth developmental level is they know how to do the task really well. They're really highly committed. And so what we do is we put these 4 developmental levels on the scale, and for this model, so it fits on Blake and Mooton's managerial grid, they put the low over here and the high over here. And so theoretically, employees start at a low developmental level, and across their career or across some time span, they increase in their competence, real low competence here, medium competence here, high competence here, and their commitment kind of wavers. They're high commitment here, but low commitment here. And so what you're supposed to do is to find the right leadership style. You're supposed to find the commitment level of the followers. And that's what we have down here. So down here we have D1 through D2 through D3 to D4, the development level of the follower, and that is supposed to dictate what part of the path that you're on. So when you have a new employee who doesn't know what they're doing, but they're all enthusiastic, you're supposed to direct them. You're supposed to tell them, be very directive, telling them what to do. Don't give them much supportive behavior because they're already really motivated. They don't need that. And then as they advance to D2, They still need a lot of information because they're kind of new at. They need a lot of direction, but as their motivation goes down, they need more relationship behavior. So they need coaching. Now, as they continue to to develop, they're not going to need as much directive behavior, and that's what the supporting role is in this model. They still might not have much enthusiasm, so you need to give them a lot of relational support. But finally, they'll get up to some point where they're extremely competent. They don't need direction from you anymore, and they don't need support from you anymore. You can just delegate to them and let them go. And so that's how this model is supposed to work. You start on the path here with an employee who doesn't know anything but is enthusiastic. You move from directing to coaching to supporting to delegating as they increase in their development levels. Now, so in practice, how does this work? What are the leaders supposed to do in the situational leadership? Well, the situational leader has two tasks. First is to diagnose the situation, which in this case means identify the developmental level of the employee. So you've got to look at the employee before you choose a style. So you might want to ask questions like, what is the task subordinates are being asked to perform? Okay, figure out what they're supposed to do, how complicated is it, and what their skill set is. And if their skill set doesn't correspond to what they're supposed to be doing, they need a lot of directive behavior. If they already have the skill set to perform their tasks, they need less directive behavior. So this would be that'll let you know how developed they are. But then also you ask how motivated are they to do the job. If they're not very motivated, they need a lot of relational support. If they are motivated, they don't need much relational support. So you diagnose the situation, you look at the developmental level of the employee, D1 through D4, and then you choose the appropriate style, S1 through S4. And so you choose the leadership style that correspond to the employee's development level. Okay, so that's the theory. Now let's look at some of the strengths and weaknesses of this. Now the strengths is that it emphasizes leader flexibility. It's saying that leaders should change their style based on the requirements of the situation and the subordinate needs. And that's really good because sometimes one leadership style is going to work better in another situation, in one situation than another. So this is the first theory that starts saying that you need to adapt your leadership style. Sometimes you need to be more directive. Sometimes you need to be more supportive. Another strength of this is it emphasizes differential treatment. Not all employees need to have the same interaction with you. Some you can just let go. Some need a lot of help. It's kind of like the squeaky wheel gets the oil. You need to look at the employee to figure out how you're going to respond to the employee. So these things are really good. Now there's some semi-strengths also. One is what the textbook calls marketplace approval. Consultants love this, and they often promote situational leadership as a very credible model for training managers to become effective leaders. And as I said, maybe some of you have already had training in situational leadership. There's tons of information about this, tons of products that you can buy, tons of consultants that will come in and teach that. And it's relatively clear. Situational leadership clearly states what a leader should and should not do in various settings. So it's like there's right answers. You can read a description of something and there's supposedly a right answer that everybody should choose, a right leadership style for the situation depending on the leadership, the developmental leader, the developmental level of the follower. Now, a lot of people like this relative clarity. It's like, oh, there's answers for everything here. Other people say life is really complex, and you can't just look at two variables or actually just one variable in a sense to determine what the appropriate behavior is in a situation. Now let's look at some of the weaknesses, some of the criticisms. One of them, and the main one, is that developmental levels aren't convincing. Do employees really go from that D1 to D2, D3, D4 level? And especially, why should motivational levels go down when competence goes up? Yeah, you can get tired of a task, but this assumes that for quite a while, as competence goes up, the motivational level goes down. And what we know about humans is that, no, you're more motivated to do things that you're competent at than things that you're not competent at. And that also kind of assumes that competence levels progress continuously. You have a set of skills to master, and as you go through your career, you get better and better at it. Well, that's good if you're doing a routine task, if you're doing the same thing day after day, year after year. For example, house painting. When people start off as painters, they really don't do it too well, and they have to learn a skill set, and with years of experience, they can get really, really good. But nowadays, the task requirements are changing so often. The job requirements, the technology is changing. There's just continually changing that typically you find yourself doing some things where you're competent at on one day, things that you're not too competent on the other. Something changes and you need more training. You get put into some situation that's not ever going to correspond to your skill set, and you need to get a different set of responsibilities. And so this continual movement from D1 to D4 with this fluctuating commitment doesn't describe how a lot of people function. Now, in this question of receiving support from a supervisor, most people would not say it depends on their developmental level. Most people say they need support depending on the task requirements, whatever they're supposed to be doing right now. That's how much interaction and support they need from their superior. The relational context, depending on how close of a relationship with the supervisor, how well you get along, things like that, and their life situation. Sometimes people need more support than other times. So when you ask people how much support do you need from your supervisor, they're not going to say it depends on my developmental level. They're going to give a ton of other variables. And then we know that there's other things that affect the support that people need. For example, people that are more educated tend to say they need less support. Women tend to appreciate relational support more than men do. So there's a lot of demographic factors that can come into play that should influence the support that a manager gives. Plus, there's the actual manager's style, what the manager is most comfortable doing, what the manager can do best. So it's not convincing that the developmental styles should determine what the leadership style should be. Another criticism, and this is a big criticism, is that research just doesn't show that this model says what the best type of leadership style is for the developmental level of the follower. It makes a nice curve on the picture, but when you start measuring it, you don't get that nice relationship. There's too many other variables, and whatever the developmental level is such a small influence that you can't apply it across different situations. So there's really not very much evidence that the situational leadership works in real life. And another criticism that's even a danger is that when consultants come in and they give situational leader assessments of leader effectiveness, you can take a test to measure how effective of a leader you are. And in fact, the textbook gives you a short test like that. There's one right answer for whatever situation there is. And so even if you're an effective leader who always uses the same style, maybe you always use the team management, high relationship, high directive, and you're very effective at it. If you always choose that style on the leadership assessment, you'll come off as someone who doesn't know how to lead, even though you really are effective. So it can be you can get some faulty data indicating somebody's leadership ability, some data that can be downright false if it's not used carefully. Well, I hope you enjoy reading this chapter. There's lots of good things in it. There's also the dangers of this approach. I hope you enjoy some of the descriptions that in the textbook, but then also the self-test you'll probably find a bit challenging, or maybe you'll just get it automatically. It should be an interesting exercise for you.